In a world where you could be doing anything else with your time, like earning yourself a future or having a fulfilling relationship of some kind, grab that controller instead and get ready for another fat steaming dump to be taken on a classic video game series, Dungeons & Dragons: Dark Alliance. Instead of a new version of the isometric PS2 Diablo clones that you remember so fondly, discover what Wizards of the Coast decided to do with the Dark Alliance franchise instead, which is to license some of the characters you might know if you read a particular set of D&D novels that were popular 2 full decades ago, and slap them in an uninspired third-person Vermintide ripoff, except without the AI director that made those games interesting, and instead featuring a bunch of action game combat that shatters into a million pieces the moment your online game lags. In a disappointing C game that briefly raised the hopes of fans before destroying them like so many goblin spines. Although, if you had the misfortune to see the tone of the original trailer, you might have seen this coming. Choose your class from the standard D&D adventuring party of fighter, barbarian, ranger that doesn't really use magic, and another fighter. Then get ready to do no customization whatsoever, because you're supposed to already know who the Bristow Durden is, other than unlocking more moves for combat that have little to no relation to what these classes do in actual D&D. Then play through a story that feels like it had absolutely zero effort put into it anyway, making the inclusion of the characters and the decision to call it Dark Alliance feel like a cheap ploy to get people to buy something they never would have considered otherwise, which makes it pretty great that it came out on Game Pass, because you have a much better chance of finding out that it sucks for free. Grind through the standard loop of a Dark Alliance level, where you'll wander around massive levels full of brain-dead traps hiding caches of loot, until you run into the next group of guys standing around waiting for you. Then defeat them in the simple 2-button Batman combat, so you can pick up the next barrel or key or whatever. Then rinse and repeat for what feels like way too long until you finally reach the end of the level, and go back to the hub just to see what your treasure even is. A terrible design decision not seen since Anthem that takes a lot of the fun out of finding a shiny new sword, and makes it feel like opening a loot box instead. Not that it matters, because the stats on them are basically meaningless until you start pushing up the difficulty level and really getting your grind on, which would require you to want to play a lot of this game in the first place. And folks, it's just not happening. Uncover the true core of Dark Alliance's failure, the combat, which aims for the tactical variety and visceral feel of a god of war, but ends up stiff and finicky enough to never stop feeling awkward, especially because using your unlocked moves depletes your max stamina, and you mostly replenish it by getting a parry, which feels in practice like you're being punished for trying to have too much fun, and absolutely destroys the flow of any online session with even minor latency. Of course, that's when it's not so bad that you're just dying immediately for no apparent reason. Just take me, gods of lag. I welcome the sweet release of not playing this anymore. So flex that subscription and satisfy that morbid curiosity. But do not, under any circumstances, purchase this for actual money, because as sucky as this whole package is, its cardinal sin is just being so extremely boring that you can't even enjoy it ironically. It's less like watching a car crash and more like going to the DMV. Starring Dwarf Fortress, Ivor Wolfkist, The Female, and Tyler Doerden. D&D Dork Annoyance, 4th edition. You know, honestly, if they hadn't called this game Dark Alliance, it would probably be about half as offensive. But you probably also would have never heard of it. So you gotta hand that to them, right? Tell us what you'd like to hear in my epic voice in the comments below. If every pork chop were perfect, we wouldn't have hot dogs. So many have remained there on property, as you know so many calls. Because you equated happiness with success, and now that you've achieved it, life is meaningless. Activision is so corrupt and greedy that even the devil would say, holy shit.